Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Hello, this is Elise Brand from PowerUp at Work.
And we are delighted that we are sharing this webinar with Joan Sedita. Joan, you want to say hello today?
Yes, hello everyone.
Great. So let's get started. You all have a copy. Ariel, if you want to go to the next slide. So just to set the context for us, the purpose of this session is to take a look at evidence-based, research-based strategies for teaching context clues. And at the same time, and aligned to that, we want to show how technology, how use of varied technology tools can enhance and support both teaching,
voice conference call.
Teaching and learning. So it's a combination of the strong evidence-based practices that are supported by the technology. Another purpose of this session is to do some sharing. The advantage of all of us being together online in this virtual environment is that you could use the chat to share with us. So if you have a question, or if you have a comment, or if you want to say how you do something, then please use the chat so that we could feel as if we're a little community of learners all together. Let's get into a little more detailed introduction. So if we go to the next slide. Joan, let me turn it over to you so you can say a little bit more about Keys to Literacy.
Great. Hello, everyone. For those of you who are not familiar with Keys to Literacy, we're based here in Massachusetts, which is where we're doing this webinar from. And our goal is to train teachers in best practices for teaching literacy, in particular comprehension, writing, and vocabulary, which is why we're focusing on vocab today. I'm going to be focusing today on the sort of the pedagogical end of things. You know, we'll talk about what we learned about best practices for teaching context clues, and then my dear friends from PowerUp will be adding the technology pieces. Judy?
Okay, if you go to the next slide. So I just want to give you a little sense of when we talk about we're from PowerUp, we're not from a workout place. We happen to be working on a federally funded website, the PowerUp What Works website. This is our home page. It's free. There's no registration. There's no login. You can go anywhere on the website without ever hitting a wall. And just so that you know that PowerUp and what we'll be drawing on in PowerUp today is the fact that we combine good evidence-based English language arts practices with technology aligned to the Common Core state standards, and also that students with disabilities and those that struggle can succeed. So that's what we'll be drawing upon today. So Ariel, let's move on and take a look at just to, again, to continue to set the context. Why do we teach context clues? And I guess that's a good question to even put in the chat. Why do you teach context clues? Are you teaching context clues so that your students have a strategy that can help them become more independent readers, so that they could recognize words in context, that they can expand their vocabularies over time, not only for reading, but for writing and their speaking vocabularies? And of course, everything that we do in literacy is because we want students to better comprehend text, and we want them to understand the vocabulary, a key element of ongoing comprehension. Let's just set the context with one more slide by taking a look at some of the key Common Core standards that have to do with context clues. Determine the meaning of general, academic, and domain-specific words or phrases in a text relevant to, we picked grade 4, but it could be other grades as well, given the topic or the subject area. And use the context to confirm or self-correct word recognition and understanding. Rereading as necessary. And what we're going to be showing you today, that beyond rereading, there are different strategies that you could use to unlock the meaning of words. Okay, so let's get going in terms of just reminding everyone that in order to be able to be successful with context clues, we're thinking about how we can combine evidence-based practices with technology tools. And for us in PowerUp, on the next slide, we show what we mean by evidence-based practices, that it's about how teachers provide clear explanation, and we'll be talking about that, how you give students strategies and models, and Joan, too, will be giving some strategies today, and Elise will be showing how to support that with the technology, different models for working with context clues, and all the ways that you can provide opportunities for practice with technology as well. There's a handout that we have that will be in the Google Docs, and it was also part of the list of handouts when you had your invite for today, and it says differentiate the strategy context clues. In this handout, it has along the left-hand column those 3 categories of evidence-based practices: provide clear explanations, give students strategies and models, provide ongoing formative assessment. It should have said provide opportunities for practice. And then we have all of these strategies that go along with it. We're going to go even more deeply into strategies that are relevant as Joan picks up the pace next. But first, let me just turn it over to Elise for 1 minute so she can just give you a little bit of a background of the kind of technologies that we'll be talking about, that she'll be talking about with Joan in combination. When Joan talks about strategies, Elise will be talking about technology. Elise, you want to talk about these different areas of technology tools?
Sure. Thanks, Judy. I just want to check. You can hear me now, yes?
Yes.
Perfect. When we're talking about types of technology tools that can support students in working with context clues and building vocabulary more generally, we're generally talking about a couple different categories of tools. Digital text, which provides students opportunities to mark up a text, to link to additional resources from within the text to help them understand what they're reading, opportunities for them to annotate text, or for teachers to add annotations that can help support students as they're going through, and using what we call agents and tutors. And there are programs available that may have an agent built in that stops a student while they're reading and poses a question sort of similar to what a teacher would do and says, what do you think about this, or where do you think this might fit into the larger story? It provides sort of those prompting questions. Additionally, we may look at things like multimedia supports, and those may be things that provide diagrams or images or even short videos that help explain a concept that a student is reading about. Students can make use of online reference materials like dictionaries and thesauruses or encyclopedias that can be woven in or embedded throughout a text. And then, sort of the fun things, vocabulary activities and games that can help students with building word recognition and word knowledge that can help boost their understanding. So if you can move on to the next slide.
Yep.
Thanks, Ariel.
So I'm going to pick it up at this point, and we'll be doing some kind of back and forth where I'll introduce an instructional practice and make some suggestions, and then Elise and Judy will jump in to suggest some very specific low and no-cost technology supports. So let's begin with the next slide, Elise. And this slide of overlapping Vens will help us focus on this, on using context clues as one of several best practice components for teaching vocabulary. As many of you know, there is no single best way to teach vocabulary. We actually need a combination of both direct and indirect methods. So we need things like pre-reading, and we need to know how to identify very specific words to teach in depth. We need to teach about word parts, word consciousness. So these word learning strategies are one of a handful of components. And then if we look within that category of word learning strategies, there are actually 2 of them, which very much overlap. You want to use them at the same time. And that is, how do you use context clues to figure out a word you don't know? That's what we would call clues outside of the word. But we also have clues that you get within the word. And And those are things like knowledge we have about morphological parts, knowledge about roots and suffixes and prefixes. We're going to focus today on the outside clues, but I just want to remind us all that we want to teach kids both ways of looking at this, because it's when the student combines both the clues from outside and inside the word that they get the most information to be able to inference. I also would like to say that, you know, in the literature, these are called word learning strategies, but I like to call them word figuring out strategies, because that's really what we're teaching the kids to do. How do you, when you don't know what a word means, when you run across it in your reading, what strategies do you have for trying to figure it out? So we can go to the next slide. On the left side of this column, you have the steps in something that Bauman and his colleagues put together that they call the vocabulary strategy. And like a lot of good practice for explicit instruction, it's a list of steps that you would want to teach kids to follow. This kind of list or set of steps is something you could put on a card or on a poster in a classroom. But basically, the steps are as follows. You want to teach kids so that when they get to a word they're stuck on, the very first thing they do is try to determine if there are any context clues either within the words, in the phrases surrounding the word, and even in the sentences. And in fact, later we'll talk about how there might be pictures. Second thing is you want them to look inside the word for those word part clues, and then using both the inside and outside, try to guess at the word. And then, when you guess what you think the word is, try out the meaning in the original sentence. So that is, read back the sentence yourself, but substitute your wording, your understanding of what you think the word means for the spot where the word is. And if it makes sense, you know, you probably have a pretty good shot that you figured out the meaning. And then, as always, if you're not sure or if you want to confirm, that's when you can refer to a dictionary or some other resource. And Elise, this may be where you want to point out some of the ways that technology can make every step in this process easier for the students.
Sure. You know, as you can see along the side, we've outlined some of the technology supports that I just mentioned in the previous slide. With providing students digital text, it gives them the opportunity to kind of play around a little bit more than just having a piece of paper in front of them and be able to, you know, put in the word that they're guessing. If they're guessing the meaning of the word, they may be able to substitute and then read that sentence to themselves again. Does this make sense? Does it work, the word that I thought? Or being able to mark up a text and add notes and highlight, or being able to instantly access for that dictionary definition. You know, many word processing programs or using things online like a Google Docs type of tool allows a student to quickly click a word and get a definition, or look up a dictionary or thesaurus entry on that word. So it gives them instant access as opposed to having to go and look something up. So if we go to the next slide, I'm just choosing
Elise, I was just going to add something that
sure.
I was in a school recently, and in terms of marking up the text with highlighting, because the context clues is sometimes not right next to the word, that it may be somewhere else in a paragraph or in a sentence, the teacher was directing the students to go through the text and highlight any of the text that could be the context for understanding that word. So I just wanted to share that example before you went on.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add a comment too, because you know we're talking. You were talking, Elise, about how the students can use these tools, and yes, the teacher can direct the kids if she's working with them. But the other way that these tools can be used is, let's say the teacher is sending the students home to read something, and they won't have access to the teacher. The sort of annotating and marking and highlighting, if the teacher prepares the text ahead of time by underlining or highlighting or even inserting some of the synonyms that might be used, that's another way that the highlighting can help.
I'm also thinking that so many classrooms across the country are using interactive whiteboards. And one of the evidence-based practices is to teach us to model for students, and how many times you can use that interactive whiteboard and do the marking of the text, the inserting of the comments, the annotating, all the things that we've talked about with digital text right there to give students those models. I think, Elise, now we're going to pause so you can go on to your next slide.
No, those were great examples. Thank you. And yes, we're just showing a couple free, I picked only free for today, technology tools that illustrate just a few of these technology strategies, but we'll also have lists available of many, many more technology tools that obviously we couldn't discuss all today. But the first one I wanted to talk about is a free website called WordHippo, and there's more online dictionaries out there than you could probably guess, but this one does a little bit something different, which is why I wanted to highlight it. It allows students to search for word meanings, similar words, opposite words. It words it in this way so that it's more familiar to students sometimes than the words synonyms and antonyms. Students can also find other words that rhyme with it. The word that they're searching for, they can search for sentences that use the word that they're trying to look up and examples. And so there are great ways of students being able to play around with vocabulary, explore what's another word that means the same thing as this word, what's another word that means an opposite thing, is that helping me start to gain some background knowledge and some understanding of what this word is. And it's a very easy website to use. It's very kid-friendly, and so that was one I wanted to focus on initially as an example.
Yeah, thanks, Elise. This is Joan here. When I tried out WordHippo, I have to say I was very impressed. It's very easy to access the word. What I like about it is it's giving you that other information. It's giving you opposites. It's giving you synonyms. And, that's when you are going to have kids focus on a word, you want them to do more than just be aware of the dictionary definition. So let's turn to the next slide. And at this point, let's talk a little bit more about what makes up context. And one of the first things I have here is pictures. In a few moments, we're going to go over one of the handouts I've given you for this, so you can see just how powerful the pictures that are within the context can be to help figure out a word. But of course, we also have the information that you get within the sentence around the word, but also within the paragraph. The third, and that's what most teachers think about when they think about using the context. I'll often hear teachers say, read the sentence before and the sentence after. But let's jump for a minute to 4, because there are sometimes clues in the broader overall text. For example, sometimes the title of the text gives you a huge clue that's going to help you make a connection to the word. Sometimes, in addition to the pictures, the captions that are under the pictures, or the charts, or the headings and subheadings. So what I was hoping to do today is to get you to stretch your thinking about context as not just the words that are immediately around your context clue. The other point with number 3 that we want to make is that what allows kids to be able to use the context is having an ability to inference, and that's tough for kids. And my goodness, Judy, you and I could probably do 2 whole days on inferencing skills. But one of the things I like to remind folks about inferencing is that inferencing really depends on having background knowledge. So it's not just having the cognitive ability to make a link with something that's implied, but do you have sufficient background knowledge to make that link? So the other thing we want to think about when we're asking kids to read text that might have a lot of unfamiliar vocabulary is to give them some overall background information to which they can make connections to their existing background knowledge, and that's going to make it a whole lot easier for the students to tap into those kinds of clues as well. Elise, you want to pick up the right column?
Sure. So picking up on what Joan was just talking about, there are some ways when using digital text that you can set students up for success. You can create these opportunities for building background knowledge. You can embed links or images within the digital text. There's tools for being able to do something very simple, like a Word document and adding a picture or adding a link to a website for more information. And then there are more full-featured tools that can allow you to do something on the web, like embedding a video that students could watch. But either way, you're providing students with some kind of mental and image that they can attach onto what they're reading. Being able to mark up the text, as Joan mentioned earlier, whether that's the student marking up the text or the teacher adding in supports for the student as they read, giving students the opportunity to take notes or include comments, particularly if you're using, a lot of teachers now are using Google Docs with their students, and so that's one way that you can be sort of collaborating with a student. They can mark up a text, the teacher can look at that same text and add a comment back to help support what students are doing, whether they're directly with them in the classroom or not. And sort of on that note, I wanted to show an example of an app that hooks up with Google Docs that does all of these things and has recently been made available free for teachers. So I thought this would be a good hot thing to talk about. So if you can switch to the next slide, I'll keep talking. So some of you may be familiar with Read and Write. There's a software program. They've recently created, or not so recently, but had an app created for Google, but they've just recently made it available free for teachers. So it's a browser add-in. You can use it with PCs, Macs, and Chromebooks, and you can use it to create accessible Google documents. And that has tons of built-in supports, many of the things that we've been talking about in terms of technology supports for students. Text-to-speech, there's illustrated dictionaries. You can see a little example in this screenshot there of a picture dictionary that goes along with it. It has word prediction if students are using it for writing. It has the opportunity to highlight and take notes and annotate text. And so this is a great example of a way that you can provide students with multiple embedded supports for reading a digital text and being able to mark up and annotate, or being able to access pictures and images that can help build their understanding.
Elise, we're talking about students, and I just want to emphasize how these supports are so beneficial to struggling students. The ability to go from text to speech, to hear the text, the ability to see the illustrated dictionaries if they can't read dictionary definitions, the ability to make text explicit by highlighting, and the ability to put things in their own words to see if they could translate what they see in the text into meaning. So I'm always thinking, every time you're talking and Joan is talking, I'm always thinking about those struggling students and those with disabilities, and how these strategies really can allow for the differentiation of instruction.
Yeah, excellent, Judy. And I want to add something about struggling students and the value of text-to-speech. It wasn't that long ago that in order to access text-to-speech technology, schools and parents had to spend an awful lot of money to be able to get those kinds of apps. And now that this is free, basically any text that can be put into digital form, you now have access to this free text-to-speech. And for many of our students, the first hurdle they have to overcome when they're reading text and they come across a word that they're unfamiliar with is they may not even know how to decode it. And so the text-to-speech helps them first, encode the word, hear what the word is. Now, once they do that, they still might not know what the word means, but at least they're hearing it pronounced correctly.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. So this next slide, actually for those of you who've had a chance to download some of the handouts for this activity, there are two that I'm going to refer to. The first one, let's start with it. At the top it says types of context clues. This is the one that does not have any pictures. And for those of you who don't have this in front of you, you can download it later. Basically, we're going to focus on the left column. And these are what I would call types of context clues. It's certainly not limited to these 6 types, but these are the most typical kinds that you might find. And I'm sharing these with you not so much that you want your students to memorize these 6 types. This is more for your use as a teacher to recognize when you're looking at text from your classroom that you want kids to read, to be aware of, are there clues provided? And if so, is the clue more of a definition that's embedded in the text? Is it providing a synonym? So let's take a look, if you will, at the first handout. And up at the top, I have each of these 6 types of clues listed, and then to the right, an explanation. And then the rest of the handout, what I've done for you is given you 2 examples of each type of context clue. And these all examples, by the way, I've pulled from, they're all examples from texts that students are reading most typically in middle school. We don't have the time to do the full activity, so I'll let you complete it afterwards if you like. But there's space under each set of examples for you to determine which type of context clue. So I'm going to just kind of quickly give you all the answers, but I highly suggest that you, when you have a few moments, you try to do the activity on your own. The first 2 examples, the one that starts with water, soaks for the words pores and spaces, and then the second one about a triptych, those are both examples of synonym clues. The second, which has the words pupil and cumulus, those are examples of comparison clues. The third, which includes the word pollination and the word tenements, these are examples of a description. Now, sometimes it overlaps, and you can also think about these somewhat as definitions, but a description gives you not just a formal definition, but kind of gives you sort of, I don't know how else to put it other than to kind of look at the 2 examples you have there. The next set of words that includes the words mutualism and optimist, these are clearly examples of examples. I think the hint on the first one is where it says an example of mutualism. The 5th one that has the words urbanization and diffusion, these are examples where the definition is just clearly embedded right within the same sentence. This is the kind of context clue you're more likely to see when you're using a textbook, because textbook publishers often are identifying certain words that they believe the teacher should focus on, and so they go out of their way to embed the definition. What I'd like teachers to do is think beyond the list of words that the publisher is giving you, and instead try to identify a smaller set of words that your particular students are going to have difficulty with. And that might be words that are not highlighted by the publisher. Often when you do that, what you find is that the context clues in the text are not as clear because obviously the publisher hasn't decided to focus on those words. And then the last set of examples you have, which has the words compound, element, and draftee, these are examples of where they give you an opposite. They give you a contrast, and in doing so, it helps the student figure out what the word means. So that's the first handout. The second one is 2 pages, and it's got some visuals on it. So for those of you who have that in front of you, let's take a look at the very first one, which is a picture of a whale. This is a story by Rudyard Kipling. Many of you may be familiar with it, How the Whale Got His Throat. So the passage uses some terms that kids might not be familiar with. First, they use the term mariner. Then they use the term jackknife. And then they use the word grating, G-R-A-T-I-N-G. And the description basically reads, but while the whale had been swimming, the mariner, who is indeed a person of infinite resource and sagacity, had taken his jackknife and cut up the raft into a little square grating, all running crisscross, and he had tied it firm with his suspenders, and he dragged the grating good and tight into the whale's throat, and there it stuck. Well, first of all, this is a really long, complex sentence. And second of all, for many kids, there's just so many words in this sentence that it's really hard to visualize how these words are being used. But for those of you who have the picture in front of you, you can see how the picture gives you so many clues that are helpful. It shows you what the mariner, who the mariner is. You really see a picture of the grating. Let's take a look at the bottom example. I'm not going to read all of these out for you, but this one is about the word paramecium and another scientific word related to it called trichocyst. Now the description, it's really hard to imagine what this paramecium looks like and what these trichocysts that are on it looks like. But when you look at the visual that's provided, it's the perfect clue. You see many of these little tiny hairs coming out all along the edges of this oblong paramecium, and the context clue is very obvious. The next one I have at the top of the next page goes with the word ziggurat, which was a type of building built from clay bricks. And while the sentence gives you some clues about what a ziggurat might look like, it's the visual picture where you see how it is, has like staircases that end up at a point at a top, and the fact that they have little tiny people down in front of the ziggurat lets you understand just how enormous the buildings were. And then finally, the last example we have is for some words, the word principal and accomplice. And you know, the term principal is something that most kids are going to think of the more common meaning, obviously the principal in the school. But in this case, the word principal is relating to when someone commits a crime. So who's the main person committing the crime? That's the principal. And the accomplice is the person who's kind of supporting them. And once again, the visual picture we have here is somebody hijacking a car, stealing a car, and you've got the accomplice standing, you know, as the lookout. So these are two examples of activities that the kinds of things you can use with kids. You find these examples in the text that you're working with. Just pull them right out of the written text or pull some of the visuals out.
Joan, I want to ask you a question. I keep thinking sometimes that it's what helps you figure out that something is a context clue is the punctuation.
Yeah.
How many times have I seen, you know, a word and then a comma, and then it's like the next word after that set off in comma is really like the synonym to something.
Yeah.
Or a word and then dash, dash, and it's like a little example or a description.
Exactly.
And I've seen teachers really try and help kids use the punctuation as a way to help them think that that's another clue built into the text to help them say, oh, that must be a clue for the word.
Thank you, Judy, for pointing that out. And you know, a few steps earlier when we were listing the kinds of clues, we said clues within the sentence or the sentences around the word. But one aspect of sentence structure that we often don't think about is what's called the syntactic clues.
Exactly.
You know, so for kids who are really good with language, and as they're reading, and they do this without even being aware of it. Yeah. They see how that word is placed with the other words in the sentence, and it gives them clues about, gee, is that word a person, place, or thing? Is it a word of action? And again, they're not using that terminology. And so the punctuation that Judy just mentioned is very much connected to those syntactic clues. So yeah, good point. Let's not forget that.
I think this will connect to the next slide about graves.
Yes, good point. So Ariel, can we move to the next slide? Excellent. So this is another resource. Michael Graves, who I think is one of those rare researchers who does a great job of taking the research and then unpacking it in a meaningful way so that teachers can translate it into things they can do in their classroom. And so I've borrowed this set of steps from Graves. And you can just kind of follow along with me. But again, this, like the previous set of steps, these are things that kids who are good naturally good at using the context are sort of doing these things automatically without thinking about it. But for our kids that need more explicit instruction, providing them with a set of steps like this that's tangible, maybe on a card or poster, until they're able to get this embedded in their thinking and at an independent level, it really helps. So Graves' 4 steps begin with asking the student to first ask yourself, does this make sense? So if there's, after you read a few sentences, if there's something that doesn't make sense, you want to then say, is it because there's a word or a couple words here that I don't understand? And then you want to slow down, identify that word or words, and then slowly read the sentence again, as well as reading the sentence before it and the sentence afterwards, trying to find any of those clues that we've been talking about. Now, Graves doesn't list this in his 4 steps, but I would say go beyond just the sentence that's before, and I would say go back and look at the headings and the title, and go back and look and see if there are any pictures or other visual clues. This last step is what I really like about this, and that is, so when you've done all that, and if you think you've been able to figure out what the word means, substitute your guess. So substitute a phrase or a synonym back into the sentence. Read it back out again, and if it makes sense, then again, keep on reading. If it doesn't, then it means that there was not enough information in the context clues, and you're going to have to use another tool to figure out what the word means, you know, preferably some of the tools that Elise has been talking about. And Elise, I'm going to turn it over to you because that leads us into the next slide.
Sure. So this next slide is another example of a technology tool that can help students with analyzing words in context, building some of their vocabulary knowledge, and going through those activities that Joan was just talking about of substituting a word, seeing if it makes sense, going back. And some of you may be familiar with Visual Thesaurus. It's a subscription-based website, but they do have a free tool called Vocab Grabber that I find quite fun. Students may not find it as fun, but it is interesting. It's similar in some ways to word clouds, that these tools that automatically pull out the most frequent words and show them in bigger fonts. It does similar type things. You can see there's a sample text that was pulled out. You can paste in any text you want, and words that come up more frequently are shown larger. And then words are also color-coded according to what content area or parts of speech they fall within. So if it's a word that is a biology word, or it's a word that's related to chemistry, those words, for example, you know, biology may show up as purple and chemistry may show up as green. So it helps give students an understanding, okay, that's an unfamiliar word, but I know now that it relates to chemistry, or I know now that this relates to geography and places, to help give them that context. And then you'll see over on the right-hand side, it gives students a word map, which is what Visual Thesaurus is kind of famous for. They create these maps that show synonyms and antonyms scattered around the key word. And so you can access that word map for free, and then it gives students the definition. It tells them what part of speech the word is, or whether it may show up sometimes as a verb as well as, you know, an adjective, for example. And then it gives examples of this word in context and where it's shown up. So this is a really interesting way for students to be able to explore text in multiple different ways, with color coding and with being able to click on any of these words. So this example is showing Bumble, but students could go through and say, okay, well, here's a word that I didn't understand, gruel, I can see on the screenshot, and click that word gruel, and they would get the same thing. They would get a word map showing synonyms and antonyms for the word gruel. They would get the definition, and then they would get multiple examples of that word used in a sentence so that they can look at it in different contexts.
You know, I'm relating this tool, which is a fabulous tool, back to Graves' first step, and that is, does it make sense? And I think that it's always about the sense making. So with access to the definition and seeing all of this, it still comes back to that question, even though I can find this definition, does this definition make sense? And the beauty of that web up in the right-hand corner is that it's a dynamic web, and you can keep playing around with it to see how that fits back into the sentence. Does it make sense in this sentence, in this paragraph, given the purpose of this text? So it's always using these tools and coming back to the sense making.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess I really favor the use of reference tools that are more of a thesaurus type. because I find that synonyms are so much easier and more powerful for kids to quickly substitute that one word synonym than if they go to a formal dictionary entry and try to substitute the full definition. So when I tried this out, Elise, I really liked it.
Do you have any more ideas for any more technology tools, Elise? What can you show us? Where can we find some more, Elise? Maybe we can go to the next slide. You might have something.
Funny you should mention that, Judy. It's like you're an audience plant.
Definitely.
So because there are so many more tools and, you know, we have limited time to talk about things, I wanted to show just a couple highlight examples of some of the types of technologies that we're talking about and things that were free. But I've also compiled a list, and I add to this all the time. We have multiple Pinterest boards that PowerUp has created, but we created one specifically for context clues. And I just put in all of the cool dictionary, thesaurus tool, vocabulary games, word tools that allow students to play with language and look at vocabulary from a variety of different perspectives. And most of these are free. There may be a couple apps in there. I'll also put in apps, you know, for things like the iPad or Android tablets that are often very low in price. I try to focus, my mantra is always free or cheap. So you can go to our Pinterest board and find many more examples of technology tools that I do not have time to talk about today.
Great. So let's move on.
Yeah. So I would just want to take a couple minutes to now let's kind of step back a little bit about using context and teaching students how to use context. Ariel, there's a sound that's like wind. Maybe you can mute somebody who's, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'll continue. So one of the things I want to address is if we're talking about teaching kids this word learning strategy or word figuring out strategy, we can do that explicitly. And so, you know, that's where the teacher purposely plans to identify something in the text that you're using, and you're going to use any one of the techniques or the technologies that we've been talking about today. But ultimately, the real instruction for use of context clues is going to be opportunistic. And what I mean by that is there are going to be these precious moments while you're in the middle of class looking at some text or talking about a word, and you're going to recognize that, oh my gosh, this is a perfect opportunity to take a little break and point out to the students how the context is or is not helping helping you figure out the term. So I want you to walk away thinking about what opportunities can you find for explicit instruction, doing what we're here to talk about today, but then also what opportunistic moments come in. And then the other thing, I mentioned it earlier, but I just want to remind us again that in order to apply this skill, it takes some rather strong critical thinking and inferencing skills in order to do this. Now, with this slide we have here, I borrowed this little quote from Kevin Fellman. Context works well if you have a lot of it. And that's one of the things that we have to remember, that the context doesn't always work. You know, I've picked up from the research that only 60% of the time will the context help you. Now, that means 40% of the time it won't, but 60% is pretty good. So let's switch to the next slide. And I want to show you some examples of where sometimes the context only gives you partial information. So these are two examples that I've taken out of a science and a social studies middle school text. The first one, vaccination, if you take a look at it, it sort of gives you an idea that it's something that helps prevent disease, but it doesn't really tell you exactly what vaccination means. The same with the second example, the word rapid. You get a sense that it's something that's impeding the ability to go further in the river, but you don't really know for sure what it is. Let's look at the next slide. And this one, This one comes from Beck and McCowan. To me, it's one of the best examples of what they describe as a misdirective. And that's where the context actually gives you the wrong idea of the word. Now, when you read this out loud, part of it is the emphasis you put. But, for example, if I read it with some prosody as follows, Sandra had won the dance contest, and the audience's cheers brought her to the stage for an encore. Every step she takes is so perfect and graceful, Ginny said grudgingly as she watched Sandra dance. So if I know what that word grudgingly is, I have that right prosody. But if I don't know what the word is, I might read that out loud to myself and make it sound as if it's a positive thing that she's saying. So anyway, I would just want to wrap this little series of slides up by saying when we teach kids to use the context, we also want to teach them that, unfortunately, it doesn't always work. Sometimes it gives us partial clues, and sometimes it might even misdirect us.
I think that's why you said earlier that the critical thinking and the inference is so important, so important. So let's just come to some concluding slides now in terms of where people can continue their learning, because there are so many opportunities, but we came together because we saw the great opportunities in linking the materials on Keys to Literacy with PowerUp. So if people go to the Keys with Literacy site, Joan, what would they be able to find there to support their continued learning?
So we use our website as a way to provide as kind of a clearinghouse for folks about literacy. Our first business is that we are out there training teachers all over the country, but I've always felt in my 35-plus year career that that my mission personally is to give information out about effective literacy practices. So for folks who go to the Keys to Literacy website, we have a section, you can see it along the toolbar, that says resources, and within that section there are a number of subcategories. We have free articles, free book chapters related to literacy. There's one article in particular that I wrote about vocabulary instruction. We also have free templates and lessons and resource links. They're obviously related to lots of aspects of literacy, but we do have quite a few that are connected to vocabulary instruction. Before I turn it over to Judy to talk about many resources at PowerUp, I just want to give a plug for PowerUp. The reason we got connected to do this webinar is that not too long ago I was able to attend a workshop where Elise was sharing information about all the free and wonderful materials at PowerUp What Works. And after I left, I went home and I took a look at everything on there, and it was one of those aha moments where I said, oh my gosh, this is such an amazing resource, the world needs to know about it. And so we got together, and that's part of our purpose with today's webinar, to let more folks know about what they have. And one of the pieces in particular, they have a specific strategy guide devoted to context clues. And so I would direct you to that, but as well as the rest of their materials, and I'm going to have Judy to describe those for you.
Thank you so much. Well, this is a wonderful marriage. I hope it's a really long and healthy marriage, because when we went back and looked at Keys to Literacy, we said the same kinds of things. How wonderful. So if you go to the next slide, Ariel, this again shows the home page from PowerUp, and I just want to point out our left navigation, which shows that we have ways to enter the site to get started. We have all this information about PowerUp Your Classroom, where we have instructional strategy guides on English language arts and math, all different topics, and I'll show you the ones on English language arts in a minute. We have professional development, technology implementation, and again, that PowerUp is about evidence-based practices plus technology, focusing on supporting students with disabilities and struggling students, and everything aligned to the Common Core. So let's just look at the next slide for a moment, because on PowerUp, this was the page. This is our instructional strategy guide on context clues, and we have, as we said, we have 11 different instructional strategy guides, all on ELA. The one on context clues follows the same format as every other instructional strategy guide. We have an introduction, we have a slideshow, we have a section, Teach with Tech, with our strategies, we have short videos, we have resources, we have the Pinterest page, we have what the research says, and so it's very, very strong in putting in your hands concrete strategies. Again, the combination of PowerUp, where we have the technology focus as well, and Keys to Literacy makes a wonderful combination. Let's just look at the next slide, which lists out our different English language arts strategies. In addition to context clues, we have 3 on writing, looking at the left navigation, pre-writing, drafting, reviewing. We have fluency, a wonderful, important foundational skill, self-questioning, semantic mapping, summarizing, visualizing, word recognition, presenting. So each one of these is chock full of wonderful information. As I said in the beginning, everything is free. Everything on this website is free.
So one of the things I want to point out, well, Judy has this up, when I first visited the PowerUp What Works and saw these strategy guides, for those of you who are familiar with Keys to Literacy's work, you recognize that many of their strategy guides overlap with many of the components from our comprehension and writing program. So the summarizing piece, the pre-writing piece, just there's so many of their guides that overlap. And just like today, where we shared with you best instructional practices for teaching a strategy, in this case context clues, PowerUp then gives you the research behind it, but then they also give you these wonderful suggestions for technology. So for those of you who are interested in again, learning more of how the tech supports things like summarizing some of the other Keys to Literacy things you may have heard in our training, that's where you'll find them.
We also have something in each one of our instructional strategy guides called a lesson in action. It's one of the handouts that you'll find in Google Docs, and the lesson in action is like a little case study. It's a story. It imagines that you're visiting a classroom and you're seeing how a teacher pulled together the instructional strategies with the technology to differentiate instruction. The one we included was on context clues. We hope you read that one and take a look at all of the others. To even go further than the Pinterest pages that we have within every instructional strategy guide, we also have a tech matrix, which is a database. Elise, you want to just say a few words about the tech matrix?
Sure. The Tech Matrix is a website that we started many, many years ago through a different project, and we've continued to build and expand and grow through PowerUp. And it's a free website for searching and comparing assistive and educational technology tools. So you can find hundreds of products for student learning and compare them across various dimensions, but you can also search by student disability category. We use the IDEA disability categories. You can search by Common Core Standard threads. You can search by, various features and instructional supports that the technology tools provide. So it can help you kind of narrow your focus and find a specific tool that addresses specific learning goals and student needs.
And you can find free, so we do have a cost category. Yes. You can filter by cost, so you can. So we hope that you'll follow up. Let's just look at the last 2 slides. This slide is, please contact us. We love to make friends. A lot of people knew Joan and came on because of Joan today and said private hellos to her at the beginning. So that's wonderful. So feel free to continue.
I do want to make, there's a correction. So next to my name, it has J. Sedita at Keys to Literacy, and it's actually just Joan. Joan at KeysToLiteracy.com.
Okay, Joan.
Okay,
all right.
No problem.
All right, we'll correct that and repost it. And I'm Judy's office, and feel free to contact me. And there's Elise, and if you had a technology question, Elise is a guru, so please head right to Elise about that.
Right.